Picture a converted warehouse somewhere in the heart of Los Angeles. The year is 1972, and inside this makeshift training facility, the air tastes like old leather and anticipation. Cigarette smoke hangs in ribbons near the ceiling fans, and beneath it all, 8 military men are about to witness something that will haunt their understanding of combat forever. Bruce Lee wasn't supposed to be there that night. This wasn't some Hollywood photo op or publicity stunt. This was an off-the-books gathering, arranged through whispered conversations and secure phone lines. Certain people in the special operations world had questions about whether this film star, this martial arts instructor to celebrities, could actually do what the rumors claimed. They wanted answers, they wanted proof, and they were about to get more than they bargained for. Among those 8 witnesses stood a man named Ray Dalton. Staff Sergeant Dalton was everything the military-industrial complex designed its warriors to be. 6'2", 220 pounds of functional violence. His resume read like a recruiting poster. Navy SEAL, multiple combat deployments, underwater demolition expert. The kind of operator who'd survived Hell Week when lesser men broke and quit. His forearms looked like they'd been carved from oak. His hands like they could crush walnuts without effort. Dalton had come to this secret gathering with a singular perspective. In his world, respect was earned through broken ribs and bloodied faces. You proved yourself, or you didn't. There was no in-between, and to him, Bruce Lee represented something he fundamentally distrusted: a performer, an entertainer, someone who made a living teaching movie stars how to throw fake punches for cameras. The rumors floating through the community meant nothing to Dalton. He'd seen plenty of martial arts masters who looked impressive hitting air and folded like cheap suits when real violence came calling. So he watched, arms crossed, jaw working on a piece of gum, eyes tracking every movement Bruce made as he led the other operatives through defensive sequences. Bruce's teaching style was methodical, almost professorial. He'd adjust a stance here, correct an elbow position there, explaining the physics behind each technique as if he were teaching calculus rather than combat. His voice never rose. His movements were precise, economical, everything calculated, nothing wasted. To Dalton, it all looked like theater. When the group broke for water, something shifted in the warehouse atmosphere. Dalton pushed himself off the wall where he'd been leaning and walked toward the training mat. The other 7 men felt it immediately. Conversations died mid-sentence. The energy in the room transformed from casual to electric. Everyone knew what was about to happen, even if they couldn't articulate it. Bruce noticed the approach, but his expression remained neutral. He simply stood there, a towel draped across his shoulders, breathing steady and even. "So you're the famous one," Dalton said. His voice carried the flat certainty of someone who'd never been given reason to doubt his own assessment of reality. Bruce's response was almost playful. "I'm someone." A few nervous laughs rippled through the small audience. Dalton wasn't laughing. "The word on you is impressive," Dalton continued, taking another step closer. "Fast hands. Knocked around some karate tournament guys who didn't know any better." He let that hang in the air for a moment. "But I'm curious about something. What happens when you face someone who's been in actual combat? Not some point-fighting competition, not some choreographed movie sequence, someone who stared death down and didn't blink." The warehouse had gone absolutely silent. All 8 pairs of eyes locked onto the 2 men. Bruce's body language remained completely relaxed, but those who knew what to look for could see it. His eyes. They'd acquired a focus that was almost predatory in its intensity. "You're challenging me," Bruce said. It wasn't a question. Dalton shrugged with practiced casualness. "I'm asking you to prove you're not exactly what I think you are, which is a fake." The word landed like a physical blow. Several of the witnesses shifted uncomfortably. Lieutenant Commander Harmon, who'd organized this whole demonstration, moved forward to intervene. But Bruce raised one hand slightly, a gesture that somehow contained more authority than any rank insignia. "If I'm fake," Bruce said slowly, "then you've got nothing to worry about." For the first time, Dalton smiled. It was the kind of smile that contained no warmth whatsoever. "Let's find out then." What happened in the next 90 seconds would fundamentally alter Ray Dalton's understanding of violence, combat, and his own place in the hierarchy of dangerous men. But more than that, It would reveal something about the nature of fighting that military training manuals never covered and boot camp instructors never taught. Lieutenant Commander Harmon tried one more time to stop what was coming. "Gentlemen, this isn't appropriate. It's fine," Bruce interrupted, his tone suggesting they were discussing dinner plans rather than physical confrontation. "Let him have what he needs." Dalton was already stripping off his shirt, revealing a torso that looked like it had been sculpted specifically for war. Scars decorated his ribs, his shoulders, permanent souvenirs from operations that remained classified. He rolled his neck, producing a series of cracks that echoed through the warehouse, and stepped onto the mat. Bruce handed his towel to one of the nearby operatives without even glancing at the man. He didn't stretch, didn't bounce on his toes, didn't assume any recognizable fighting stance. He just walked forward until about 8 feet separated him from Dalton, then stopped. The 8 witnesses formed a loose semicircle. Nobody spoke. The only sounds were the ventilation system humming and distant traffic noise filtering through the walls. Dalton settled into a boxer's posture, weight balanced, hands high, chin protected. It was a stance refined through countless training hours and real-world application. He began circling left, testing distances, looking for openings. Bruce stood almost square to him, hands hanging low, feet positioned in a way that seemed almost casual. But anyone with real fighting experience could see the truth beneath the appearance. He was ready, coiled, waiting. "Whenever you feel ready, movie star," Dalton said. Bruce didn't reply. He simply observed. Dalton feinted with his left shoulder, a testing movement meant to provoke reaction. Bruce didn't move. Another feint, this one more aggressive. Still nothing. Frustration flickered across Dalton's face. He was used to opponents who revealed their patterns early, who telegraphed intentions, who gave him something to read and exploit. This man gave him nothing. The SEAL decided to force the issue. He threw a straight right hand, not full power, but a ranging shot designed to establish distance and draw out a response. It was the kind of punch that had dropped men larger than Bruce Lee. Bruce moved. What happened next occurred so rapidly that several witnesses would later struggle to reconstruct it accurately. Bruce's upper body shifted maybe 3 inches left, just enough. Dalton's fist passed harmlessly by his cheek. In the same instant, Bruce's right hand shot forward in a vertical punch that traveled perhaps 12 inches total. The impact caught Dalton square in the sternum. The SEAL's forward momentum stopped like he'd hit a concrete wall. His eyes went wide. Air exploded from his lungs in a single shocked grunt. He staggered backward 2 steps, hands dropping instinctively to his midsection. Bruce hadn't moved from his position. His hand was already back at his side, relaxed. The entire exchange had consumed less than 1 second. Around the room, stunned silence. What they'd just witnessed violated everything they understood about how power generation worked, how strikes functioned, how combat unfolded. Dalton blinked, trying to process the impossible. He'd been hit before, hit hard by men who knew their business, but this was different. The punch hadn't looked powerful. There'd been no wind-up, no visible rotation, no telegraph, yet the impact had sent a shockwave through his entire body like he'd been struck with a Louisville slugger. "What the hell?" he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. He straightened, forced his breathing under control. That first flicker of doubt appeared in his eyes, though he crushed it quickly. He was a Navy SEAL. He'd survived Hell Week. He'd operated in conditions that destroyed ordinary men. He wasn't about to be intimidated by one lucky shot from someone who weighed 50 pounds less than him. Dalton reset and moved forward again. More cautiously now. He threw a jab, then another, testing reactions. Both punches missed by impossibly small margins, Bruce's head moving just barely enough to avoid contact. Nothing extra, nothing wasted. Then Dalton committed fully to a combination. Jab, cross, left hook. 3 punches thrown with real intent, each one capable of ending the fight. Bruce slipped the jab. He parried the cross with his left hand, redirecting it past his shoulder, and the hook never arrived. Because while Dalton's right hand was still retracting from the parried cross, Bruce stepped inside his guard and delivered a palm strike to the underside of his jaw. The SEAL's head snapped back, his knees buckled. For a frozen moment he seemed suspended. his body uncertain whether to fall or remain standing. Bruce could have finished it there. Everyone in that warehouse knew it. All 8 witnesses understood the fight was already over. Instead, Bruce stepped back to his original position and waited. Dalton shook his head, trying to clear the static suddenly filling his brain. He tasted copper. His vision had gone momentarily white at the edges. When it cleared, Bruce stood exactly where he'd been before. Hands still low, expression unchanged. Something fundamental shifted in Dalton's eyes. The professional detachment, the controlled aggression of a trained operator. It cracked. What emerged beneath was older, more primal. It was the look of a man whose entire identity was being threatened, whose understanding of himself was being challenged in ways he couldn't articulate. He stopped thinking about technique, stopped thinking about strategy. He just wanted to hurt the man in front of him. Dalton charged. 220 pounds of muscle and fury launched forward with the kind of commitment that left no possibility of retreat. Dalton's plan was clear. Close the distance. Neutralize the speed advantage. Turn this into a grinding, suffocating fight where his size and strength would become decisive factors. Against most opponents, it would have worked perfectly. Bruce didn't retreat, didn't circle away. He moved forward. They met in the center of the mat. But what should have been a collision became something else entirely. At the last possible instant, Bruce angled his body maybe 15 degrees right, letting Dalton's momentum carry him slightly past. Simultaneously, his lead leg swept low, hooking behind Dalton's front ankle. The SEAL's own forward drive became his enemy. His base disappeared. He pitched forward, arms windmilling, and slammed into the mat hard on his shoulder and hip. Bruce was already above him. Before Dalton could process his new position, a fist stopped 1 inch from his throat. Not a punch, a placement, a demonstration of what could have been. The warehouse held its breath. 8 witnesses stood frozen. Bruce withdrew his hand and stepped back, offering no assistance, no commentary. He simply waited. Dalton pushed himself up. His face was flushed with exertion and something darker. A thin line of blood had appeared at the corner of his mouth from the earlier palm strike. He wiped it with the back of his hand and stared at the red smear like he couldn't quite believe it belonged to him. "Lucky," he said, though the word carried no conviction whatsoever. Bruce remained silent. Dalton circled more carefully now, breathing heavier, movements less fluid. The arrogance that had carried him into this confrontation was eroding, replaced by something closer to desperation. He was watching his own mythology collapse in real time. He threw a low kick borrowed from Muay Thai instructors who occasionally worked with special operations units, aimed at Bruce's lead thigh, intended to damage the mobility that made him so difficult to hit. Bruce checked it with his shin, absorbing the impact without visible reaction. But as Dalton's leg was still retracting, Bruce's rear leg whipped forward in a side kick that covered the distance faster than the eye could comfortably process. The heel of Bruce's foot connected with Dalton's hip just below the iliac crest. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Dalton's entire left side seemed to shut down. He stumbled sideways, his leg buckling, and barely stayed upright by grabbing the shoulder of an operative who'd been standing too close. A collective gasp rippled through the 8 observers. The man Dalton had grabbed looked terrified, unsure whether to support him or get out of the way. Dalton pushed himself off and turned back toward Bruce. He was limping now, his left leg compromised, his options diminishing with each passing second. The rational part of his mind, the part that had kept him alive through multiple combat deployments, was screaming at him to stop, to acknowledge he was outmatched, to preserve what remained of his dignity. But Ray Dalton had built his entire identity on being the most dangerous person in any room. That identity was now bleeding out on the mat, and he couldn't accept it. "That all you got?" he managed, though his voice was strained. Bruce tilted his head slightly, and for the first time something resembling expression crossed his face. Not anger, not satisfaction. Closer to disappointment, the look of a teacher watching a student refuse to learn an obvious lesson. "You're hurt," Bruce said quietly. "This doesn't need to continue. I'll decide when it's over." Bruce nodded slowly. "Then you've decided." Dalton lunged again, this time reaching for a clinch, hoping to use his remaining strength to tie Bruce up. to drag him into the kind of grinding exchange where technique mattered less than raw physicality. His hands found only air. Bruce had sidestepped with a movement so economical it barely qualified as motion. As Dalton's momentum carried him past, Bruce's elbow rose in a short, tight arc and connected with the seal's temple. The sound was sharp, a crack that made several of the 8 witnesses wince. Dalton dropped to one knee. His eyes had gone glassy, unfocused. His hands reached toward the mat, seeking stability his nervous system could no longer provide. "Enough," Lieutenant Commander Harmon said, stepping forward. His voice carried both the authority of rank and the relief of someone watching a disaster finally end. "That's enough." But Dalton wasn't finished. With a grunt of pure determination, he pushed himself back to his feet. He swayed visibly, his guard non-existent, his body operating on nothing but willpower and wounded pride. He threw a right hand, slow, telegraphed, desperate. What Bruce did next would be discussed in whispered conversations among those 8 witnesses for years afterward. He didn't counter, didn't evade. He caught Dalton's wrist mid-flight, redirected the punch past his own shoulder, and in the same fluid motion stepped behind the seal and applied pressure to a point just below his ear. Dalton's body went rigid for a single heartbeat. Then he collapsed. The silence that followed was absolute. Dalton lay motionless on the mat, his chest rising and falling in shallow rhythm, his eyes half open but seeing nothing. A thin strand of saliva connected his lower lip to the canvas. His limbs were arranged in the awkward geometry of sudden unconsciousness. One arm bent beneath him, one leg twisted at an uncomfortable angle. Nobody moved. The 8 men stood like statues, processing what they'd just witnessed. Bruce released the wrist he'd been holding and stepped back. His breathing was unchanged. His shirt was barely disturbed. He looked down at the unconscious seal with an expression that revealed nothing. Not triumph, not contempt, not even particular interest. Lieutenant Commander Harmon was first to break the paralysis. He rushed forward, dropping to one knee beside Dalton, checking pulse, pupils, neck orientation. "He's breathing," Harmon announced, relief evident. "Someone get the medic." One of the operatives sprinted toward the door. Bruce walked to the edge of the mat and retrieved his towel. He wiped his hands slowly, methodically, as if cleaning away residue from routine exercise rather than physical confrontation. The men around him maintained their distance, watching him with a mixture of awe and something approaching fear. A young petty officer, barely 22, found courage to speak. "What did you do to him at the end?" Bruce folded the towel and placed it over his shoulder. "I helped him sleep." "But how?" "The body has many switches," Bruce said, his voice calm, almost gentle. "Most people don't know where they are. Fewer know how to use them." Dalton groaned. His eyelids fluttered. Harmon kept a hand on his chest, preventing him from rising too quickly. "Easy, Ray. Take it slow." Dalton's eyes opened fully, and for several seconds they held the confusion of someone waking in an unfamiliar place. Then memory returned. His gaze swept the warehouse until it found Bruce, and something complicated passed across his face. Humiliation, certainly, but also recognition. The recognition of someone who just encountered a reality he could no longer deny. He tried to sit up. Harmon helped him, supporting his back. "What happened?" Dalton's voice was hoarse, cracked. "You lost," Harmon said simply. Dalton processed this. His jaw tightened, his hands clenched into fists against the mat. For a moment, it seemed like he might try to continue, might try to salvage something from the wreckage of his pride. Then his shoulders dropped. "How long was I out?" "Maybe 15 seconds. Dalton nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on Bruce. The hostility had drained from his expression, replaced by something more complex. He looked like someone whose map of the world had just been revealed as fundamentally incomplete. "I've fought a lot of men," Dalton said quietly. "Hand to hand. For real. Not training, not sparring. For real." He paused, searching for words. I couldn't even touch you." Bruce walked toward him. The 7 other men between them parted instinctively, creating a corridor of empty space. He stopped a few feet from Dalton and looked down at him for a long moment. Neither man spoke. "You're strong," Bruce finally said. "You're skilled. You have experience most men will never have." His voice carried no judgment, no superiority, simply assessment. But you fought with your body. You didn't fight with this. He tapped his own temple. Dalton frowned. What do you mean? You decided who I was before we started. You decided what I could do. You decided what you needed to do to beat me. Bruce crouched down, bringing himself to eye level with the seated seal. You fought the man you expected, not the man who was standing in front of you. Dalton absorbed this in silence. Fighting isn't about size. It's not about strength. It's not even about speed, though speed helps. Bruce's eyes held Dalton's with an intensity that seemed to bypass language entirely. Fighting is about truth. The person who sees reality more clearly will always defeat the person who sees only what they want to see. And you saw me clearly. I saw a man who needed to prove something. A man who couldn't afford to lose. A man whose ego had become his blindfold. Bruce paused. That man was already defeated before he threw his first punch. Dalton's jaw worked. His eyes glistened. Not with tears, but with the moisture of someone confronting something they'd long avoided. I've built my entire career on being the hardest man in the room, he said, voice barely above a whisper. If I'm not that, what am I? Bruce stood up. He extended his hand toward Dalton, a man who just learned something most people never learn. He waited until Dalton took his hand, then pulled him to his feet with surprising ease. That's not weakness. The medic arrived and checked Dalton's pupils, pronounced him concussed but stable. The training session was over. The 8 men began to disperse, though nobody left immediately. They'd witnessed something significant. Bruce retrieved his bag and began packing. Lieutenant Commander Harmon approached. I should apologize. Dalton stepped out of line. He did what he needed to do, Bruce said simply. Across the warehouse, Dalton sat on a bench, head down. Bruce crossed the room and stopped a few feet away, waiting until Dalton raised his head. You hit hard, Bruce said. Your structure is good, but you telegraph with your shoulders and drop your right hand after you jab. Dalton stared at him. You're giving me advice. I'm telling you what I saw. Bruce paused. 15 years ago, I was you, a young man who needed to prove himself. It took me a long time to understand that fighting isn't the destination. It's the vehicle to knowing yourself. Dalton absorbed this. In 90 seconds, you made me feel like I don't know anything. You know many things, Bruce said, but you don't know yourself. Not yet. Bruce pulled out a notebook and wrote something on a page, tearing it out and handing it to Dalton. This is where I train. If you're ever in Los Angeles, come find me. Not to fight. To learn. After what I said? After what I tried to do? What you said came from fear. What you tried to do came from doubt. Those are not crimes. He extended his hand. Dalton took it, not as an adversary, but as a student acknowledging a teacher. My name's Ray, Dalton said. Bruce smiled. I know who you are, Ray. The question is whether you know. He turned toward the door. The room parted before him. At the threshold, Bruce looked back at the 8 men. The body can be trained in months. The mind takes a lifetime. But the person who masters his mind will never be defeated. Then he was gone. Ray Dalton sat motionless, staring at the paper in his hand. I've been underwater, he finally said to Harmon. I've watched friends bleed out. None of that shook me like what just happened. He scared you? What shook me was realizing everything I thought I knew was wrong. Every fight I've won, I was playing a different game. A smaller game. The 8 men who witnessed that night would keep the story to themselves for years. Some would take it to their graves. Years later, after Bruce Lee's death in July 1973, Ray Dalton would remember him differently than the public did. Not as the movie star or icon. He would remember waking up on a mat, having been rendered unconscious by someone half his size, and realizing everything he knew about combat about himself had been incomplete. He would remember 8 witnesses in a secret warehouse, their faces reflecting the same stunned realization. They had just seen something impossible. Most of all, he would remember the lesson that the greatest battles aren't fought against other people, but against the limitations we place on ourselves. It was the most important lesson Ray Dalton ever learned, and it took him less than 90 seconds to receive it.